Thousand Week Reich is an alternate history timeline created by AP246 on Reddit. Told with accompanying maps and illustrations, the timeline bills itself as a realistic Nazi victory scenario and strives for a degree of plausibility in its world building and not falling into the pitfalls of exaggerating the power of Nazi Germany. The Thousand Week Reich is commonly known from its adaptation in Hearts of Iron 4, in a form of mod. The point in which our timeline splits with that of the Thousand Week Reichs is the evacuation of Dunkirk in 1940. British forces fail to evacuate during Operation Dynamo, as German panzers are coming after them much faster than in our timeline due to Adolf Hitler not ordering to stop the panzers. The failure of the evacuation led to the complete collapse of British morale, and Winston Churchill was unable to convince the War Cabinet to continue the war. This leads Britain to sign an armistice with Nazi Germany, leaving the war and allowing Germany to defeat France just as in our timeline. After signing the armistice with the new Vichy French government, Hitler's Reich prepares to invade the Soviet Union. The Operation Barbarossa begins on the 22nd of June and goes similar to that of our timeline with two notable exceptions. German forces are not tied up fighting the British in the Mediterranean, nor have they sustained any losses after the surrender of France. Worse for the Soviets, however, is the fact that Britain does not support the Soviet Union with supplies. German forces, after successfully destroying the bulk of Soviet forces in Kiev Pocket, launch the attack on Moscow. To a great Axis surprise, Soviets repel them and even take back some of the lost ground. Hitler, realizing that this will not be a short war, orders the commencement of Fall Blau to secure Soviet oil. But the new threat to Germans emerged. Japan, in its foolishness, attacked the US, hoping that she would be able to destroy the American Navy by surprise at Pearl Harbor. The attack, although partially successful, did not however cause the US Navy in the Pacific to be unoperational. Americans did not declare the war on Germany, however the Lend-Lease Act was passed and the USA started to supply the Soviets. To not let the Soviets replenish their losses, Finnish forces assault Murmansk, the important port located at the deep bay of Barents Sea. Finnish forces succeed but had suffered heavy losses. This causes many in Finnish government to doubt if it is really worthy to continue this war. Nevertheless, with the Murmansk secured, the Fall Blau commences. The German forces are able to advance rapidly into the Caucasus by bypassing the city of Stalingrad. The oil fields of Maikop and Grozny fall into the Germans' hands, but the offensive starts to lose its impetus. For the moment it appears that Germany may lose, that the Axis would be stopped, but then the unthinkable commences. The traitorous Armenian SSR declares independence. Soviet forces are crippled and Baku falls on the 11th of June. Georgians, wanting to be spared the fate of their neighbors, also declare independence from the Soviet Union, and in exchange for peace with the Axis, they join him, effectively switching sites. With the Caucasus secured, Soviets are out of oil while Germans will soon have plenty of it. In the north, Leningrad fell into the Axis hands on the 1st of December 1942. Hitler expects the Soviets to soon surrender, but there is no armistice. The Red Army still stands and holds its ground. In 1943, the Reichskommissariats were created to accommodate the German shelters in the east. The Finnish forces slowly advance into Karelia, but the Germans are themselves too tired to continue with any major offensive. The distrust of the Finns and war exhaustion finally take over the government, and with complete control over Karelia and Murmansk, Finland signs separate peace with the Soviets in exchange for conquered territories. The Germans, outraged, continued the advance in the north, reaching the port of Archangels on the 3rd of October 1943. With its capture, the Archangels Astrakhan, known as the AA Line, is established as the potential border of post-war Eastern Europe. In 1944, the Soviet Union was exhausted but not still broken. The Turks rebel against the Soviet government. Turkestan achieved its independence after the Soviet reinforcements failed to contain the rebellion in March. The Turkish diversions, however, cost the Soviets the city of Stalingrad, as the reinforcements that were used to put down the rebels were originally destined to reinforce the city defenses. Germans, using this occasion, assaulted the city and despite the insane losses took it on 30th of March. As the Germans slowly advance deeper into the Union, Stalin prepares for the final stand in the city of Moscow once again. The Second Battle of Moscow begins on the 9th of November 1944. The battle on the outskirts of the city is brutal, as the Germans hope for the direct and fast takeover, just as in the case of Stalingrad. However, the great disappointment struck the German high command as the Red Army, fighting like lions, repelled the direct assault at the cost of tremendous losses on both sides. The Germans had realized that the direct capture of Moscow would be a Mosbile, so the German panzer forces attempted to encircle the city from both the north and south. The Soviets attempted to stop them, but it was too little too late. Exhausted Soviet forces were unable to stop the German maneuver. Moscow was encircled on the 26th of December of 1944. Stalin was supposedly killed during the siege of the city, but the rumors of his survival were whispered for a long time after the fall of the city, among the Soviet loyalists. After Moscow had fallen and the rest of Russia up to the AA line was taken during 1945, Germany finally sued for peace with the Soviets. Expecting the armistice to be soon signed, Hitler eagerly proclaimed victory. But there was no armistice. What remains of the Red Army still continues to fight guerrilla warfare, which further puts strain on limited German resources, and thus what remains of the fractured union behind the AA continues to oppose the Germans. In July 1945, the once great Japanese Empire was in ruins, 4 years before it gambled at Pearl Harbor, and despite some initial success, the Japanese Navy and Army was gradually pushed back toward the home islands. By 1943, the American war machine was in full strength, outproducing Japan more than 10 times, and a series of disastrous naval battles in the Philippines in mid-1944 stripped Japan from the bulk of its navy. But Japan would not surrender yet, as the two battles of Iwo Jima and Okinawa in December 1944 and February 1945 respectively have proven, and it became clear that the final battle would have to be fought on the home islands. In April 1945, the American High Command asked for a report on the readiness of the atomic weapon, as some people thought it could force the emperor to surrender, but after learning that it wouldn't be available before late July at best, they decided to start the Operation Downfall, the invasion of Japan, which would be helped by nuclear bombs. On the 25th of July 1945, known as AX Day, the United States forces consisting of the 6th Army, supported by the U.S. 3rd, 5th, and the 17th Fleets along with the British Pacific Fleet, all supported from the air by the U.S. Far East Air Forces, U.S. Strategic Air Forces of the Pacific, the Joint Anglo-Canadian Tiger Force, and the Australian 1st Tactical Air Force commenced Operation Olympic in the invasion of Kyushu. This force went up against initially the 57th and 40th Armies, part of the 2nd General Army, which consisted also of the 16th Area Army, the 216th Division, supported by the Volunteer Fighting Corps, Kokuman Jiu Sentotai, supported at sea by 100 Koru-class midget submarines, 250 Kairu-class midget submarines, 1,000 Kaitan-manned torpedoes, and 800 Shinyo suicide boats, supported in the air by the 6th Air Army, of which consisted 5,000 aircraft assigned as kamikazes, 5,000 aircraft available for kamikaze service, 7,000 aircraft in need of repair. The Volunteer Fighting Corps was very poorly equipped, mostly using molotovs, swords, knives, bayonets, polearms, staves, clubs and truncheons, sharpened bamboo and wood, and antiquated firearms. Grenades were however very common. The invasion was predated by a week of intensive American operations such as a diversionary landing with 2 divisions on the island of Shikoku, intensive bombing of the main communication and transport nodes of Kyushu, and an initial disembarkment on the small island of Shimokoshiki, off the coast of Kyushu. A few hours after the initial landings, the first nuclear weapon used in warfare was dropped on Miyakanojo, a city that held the Japanese 25th Division's headquarters and a railroad junction. The heat of the blast simply tempered the Japanese resolve. On the 3rd of August, the second nuclear bomb was dropped, this time on an industrial target, the city of Kakura, to halt the city's production of munitions, anti-aircraft guns, and beachhead fortification materials. Fighting was apocalyptic. Kamikaze attacks, banzai charges, bunkers everywhere, suicidal grenade ambushes followed by a futile charge of swords, knives, and spears of the Volunteer Fighting Corps, KGS, resulting in their slaughter, civilians committing suicide in the name of the emperor. Despite their resolve, the Japanese High Command gave the order of a retreat from the coast of southern Kyushu, where they were easy targets for the gunships, toward the mountains and forests, allowing quick advances in early August by the invading forces. But the Japanese forces would constantly attack the American forces, preventing them from going inland, and inflicting heavy casualties on the defending troops. By August 24, American casualties were at 68,000, including 5,000 casualties at sea. Japanese casualties were 195,000, not including civilians and KGS. The Japanese used chemical weapons against the invasion forces to little effect. In retaliation, the Allied forces deployed chemical weapons not only against military forces, but also against rice and corn crops. Using low-flying aircraft and cluster bombs, the affected crops would be utterly destroyed within 12 hours. Following the first two bombs, by the end of August a third bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. Convinced the United States couldn't possibly have more, the Japanese kept fighting on. In September the bloody fighting in southern Kyushu continued. In this time period, the military casualties reached their highest rates. By the end of September, a bomb was dropped every week. The targets were Nagasaki, Niigata, Oita, and Kumamoto. The Japanese resolve started to become malleable in the heat. In October, 4 more bombs were dropped on Nagoya, Fukuoka, Tosu, and Yokohama. Finally, on October 26, V-Day, the Japanese government surrendered, although not without complications. By early November, American casualty figures were at 328,000, not including naval and air losses. Japanese losses were at 1.2 million, not including KGS and civilian casualties. Japanese resolve had melted into a steaming puddle. Celebrations broke out all across the United States, and the war that had begun on December 7, 1941 was finally over. 45% of American casualties had occurred in the last 93 days of the war. In Berlin, news of the new American bomb shook Hitler, whose scientists and engineers asserted that such a weapon was unrealizable with their resources. The Führer would order the immediate restart of the nuclear program, but the shortage of skilled scientists and spy ring in America would make this endeavor much harder than planned, and across the Atlantic the American war machine was not resting. In both countries it was becoming obvious that the next decades would define not only the future of their nations, but of mankind as a whole. After the war with the Soviet Union, Eastern Europe was divided into 4 separate Reichskommissariats. The Reichskommissariat Ukraine, Ostland, Moscovan and Caucasus respectively. Instead of promised fertile Lebensraum, these places could be described as a hell on earth, not only for the local Slav population but also for the German settlers. The guerrilla warfare still goes on and thousands of German soldiers die each year fighting with Slav partisans. Atrocities are common and nobody, even German settlers, is spared of them. Living conditions could be described as nightmarish. The political structure of those Reichskommissariat is one of political infighting and great corruption. The Reich is ruthless yet extremely ineffective. Fighting a massive anti-partisan war is extremely expensive, and this along with great costs of the war and international sanctions led the Reich economy to collapse. Without conquest and pillage, Germany needs to rely on itself and her subjects, but those are extremely unstable and usually a burden on a collapsing economy of the Reich, not a source of the revenue. But the worst for the Reich was to come. Hitler fell into a coma in 1948 and von Tresckow used this opportunity to declare himself president. He was a member of Oster's anti-Nazi resistance and fiercely hated the Nazis with all of his heart. Von Tresckow hoped that the army would join him, but both the NSDAP and the Wehrmacht sided against him, and he together with his supporters were arrested and later executed. Hitler wakes up from coma, but the damage done to the Reich was indescribable. The Hitler's health has not been doing well since then, and without him, it is more than clear that the whole rotten structure of the Reich will fall apart. With each passing day the political infighting with the Reich is getting worse. The already tense rivalry between the SS and Wehrmacht is at the edge of violent outburst. Different political factions within the NSDAP are plotting in the dark, and even Himmler sees the opposition against him within the SS, led by Reinhard Heydrich. The Reich is at the edge of one giant civil war, and the Hitler is the only one holding this all together. Despite the improvement in his health, more attentive in his inner circle can clearly see that with each passing month Parkinson disease progresses. Hitler's mind is still working well, but his body is slowly becoming a shell of his former self. To turn the attention of more and more disappointment German public, Hitler orders the space program to commence with the ultimate goals of putting the German man into space and later moon. But all of the more politically connected already knew well that the question of Reich collapse is not a matter of if but the matter of when. Italy found itself a victor of the wars of the 1940s. The short war against Britain in 1940–41 saw little fighting, and as a prize Mussolini gained British Somalia, not the grand empire in Africa he had hoped for, but a small prize nonetheless. Italy also seized French Tunisia. Italy's failed invasion of Greece was supported by Germany, and as a result Italy gained a sphere of influence over the Balkans, including some influence over the new independent state of Croatia. The Italian army supported Germany's long and difficult war against the USSR, and after the Axis victory in Europe declared a glorious victory. However, the empire remains unstable, similar to that of Germany to the north. Disagreements over influence in the Balkans and general differences between their two governments have led the former allies of Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy, already on shaky terms before 1939, to increasingly view each other with hostility as the Axis breaks apart. Managing such an empire alone is a difficult task, but it seems that Italy's fascist regime is still far from collapse. Despite the economic turmoil followed by the breakup of the Axis after the end of the war, Italy starts to show signs of recovery. Oil of Libya is flowing and providing the government with decent revenue. Racial laws of 1938 were repealed, and now Italy finds itself as a safe haven for the Jews. Dreams of Ducci to restore the Roman Empire are still not diminished, as an unstable situation in Egypt might present the opportunity to seize the vital Suez Canal and form a breadbasket of the Mediterranean. The international relations are improving, and first foreign tourists are arriving to rest at the beautiful Mediterranean countryside or coast. Whispers of potential Mediterranean alliance with Spain, Turkey, Portugal, or perhaps even France can be heard among elites of the fascist party. Italy might be still in a difficult situation, but one is known for sure: in contrast to the German Reich, Italy still has a chance for a bright future even under the fascist regime. Without American involvement in War of Europe, much of it fell to the Nazis. To stop any further German expansion, the USA embraced the policy of containment, effectively threatening the Reich to stop any outside expansion. Because America in 1952 still remains the only nuclear power, Reich had no choice but to comply. Tremendous casualties of the Pacific War still reside in America's public memory, and throughout the country the strong anti-war voices can be heard from miles, but the army stands strong with threat from Germany's side. The defensive alliance known as the Atlantic Union was formed. America's economy is enjoying a big post-war boom, and many find the situation rather optimistic, but the American politics is getting more and more divided with each passing day, and the whispers of the MacArthur's military coup are getting louder and louder. Will America shine, or will the light of freedom go down? The Anglo-German armistice of 1940 led to massive political ramifications across not only Britain, but its empire. The former dominions, let alone the world, see Britain as a shadow of its former self, and this is only proven when British withdrawal from India leads to the entire subcontinent collapsing into multiple independent states. In 1952, the British still maintained a colonial empire, owning multiple French colonies, and currently are a part of an alliance with Canada and America called the Atlantic Union. If Britain is to survive the New World, it must adapt fast, and that will have to start in 1952. Despite the economic turmoil of 1940s, it appears that the situation is finally improving and the threat of bankruptcy has been solved, thanks to American help. But the country still finds itself extremely divided politically, and Clement Attlee, British Prime Minister from the Labour Party, is quickly losing ground to Conservative opposition, and the once unthinkable political party. Oswald Mosley, former leader of the British Union of Fascists and now leader of the Union movement, might be able to grab a thought to be impossible win in the general election. Britain's future still remains at stake. After the fall of France to Germany in 1940, those politicians that had not escaped signed an armistice with the Germans, creating what was at the time called the Vichy regime, with WW1 General Pétain at its head. France's democracy was dissolved, with overarching powers handed over to Pétain himself. While France formed a government in exile, the ceasefire between Germany and the UK in early 1941 seemed to end all hope of the so-called Free French from ever liberating their homeland. In 1942, an official peace treaty was signed with France, in which lands in the north and east of the country were ceded to Germany in exchange for an end to German occupation of the northern half of the country. 5 years of war later, with Soviet resistance seemingly faltering to nothing, Germany seemed to stand as the undisputed master of Europe. Hitler's Nazi regime set about restructuring the continent, annihilating Slavic peoples to colonize the East, and rebuilding Europe to Germany's content. However, as the 1940s gave way to the 1950s, this was not entirely the case. The pre-war and wartime economic boom of Germany ended, with the German economy stagnating, and with Europe's economy now partially tied to Germany's. This caused a continent-wide slump. In addition, the war in the East was in fact far from over, with a brutal insurgency being raged against both Russian rump states in the Ural region, as well as partisans behind German lines. While many French people had accepted the armistice as necessary, now a growing resentment against the new order was bubbling up, and with German troops having been pulled out to fight in the east, only the severely weakened French army was there to stop them. In 1951, Pétain died, and with him the last semblance of popularity of the French state's government. Pierre Laval, Pétain's deputy, became de facto leader, but he was no war hero. Things just about held together until now, but it appears that the situation is boiling and maybe soon de Gaulle supporters will start the civil war. Japan is a bitter loser of WW2. This country officially ceased to exist and is now under direct American military occupation. But with the beginning of the 1950s, American soldiers slowly but systematically withdrew from the islands, and the rumors of free elections can be heard among the administration of occupied Japan. Despite hate for the occupiers, some pieces of American culture had already made it through to the local Japanese culture, and some Japanese families for the first time in their lives celebrated Christian Christmas. Future of Japan remains uncertain, but it appears that the country will soon exist again, although few try to delude themselves that it will be without American influence. The victorious war against the Japanese, Chinese factions soon find themselves in fighting again. Soon the Chinese battlefield is dominated by communists in the north led by Mao Zedong and the Kuomintang led by Chiang Kai-shek, in control of the Chinese coast. The Chinese Civil War was brutal, but the communists without any outside support were finally crushed. To clear China out of communist influence, Chiang Kai-shek began the Great White Terror, purging millions of communists or even those people who were unfortunately enig to be considered as such by their neighbors or local authorities. Even though now Chiang Kai-shek appears as an all-powerful autocrat, in reality the country is still extremely fractured. Many local warlords still have de facto control over the vast portions of countryside. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, what remains of Russia behind the AA line is extremely fractured. In the Far East, local warlords had created their own states, while what remained of the Soviet government resigned in Perm. Many former Soviet high-ranking officials and military leaders such as Zhukov or Beria are now ruling over vast unpopulated areas, trying to restore the former Soviet Union. At the same time, local ethnic states had managed to get in control of vast territories. Not all warlords, however, are the remains of the old regime or the separatists such as Turks. Once thought to be dead, elements of former whites had created their own local states. Some of them want to restore the republic, while some want to bring the Tsar back to power. Future of Russia is one great unknown, but it remains more than certain that the main goals of those in charge of what it remains are reunification and vengeance. In the year 1952, the gameplay of the mode begins, but it is not, of course, the end of the official storyline created on Reddit. Although there are some differences between the official storyline and the mode itself, they are usually only cosmetic. For example, in the mod, the Atlantic Union is called the Toronto Accords. If you want to see the continuation of the official lore up to the early 2000s, let me know in the comments down below. Also, I'm using voice synthesizer since some of you have complained that it is hard to understand my strong accent. Let me know if you prefer this or my natural voice. If you liked this video, do not forget to like and subscribe to the channel, to make Ducci feel proud. Roma Invicta. See you next time.